Good evening, I'm Farhana Sheikh. Our top stories for tonight: Trump says he will put 20% on Vietnam's exports, and US lifts curbs for chip design software and ethane. All this and more coming up on AWANI International. Our first top story for tonight: the United States will place a lower than promised 20% tariff on many Vietnamese exports, according to President Donald Trump. This cooled off tensions with the country's 10th biggest trading partner, days before the US president could raise levies on most imports.
Vietnamese goods would face a 20% tariff, and transshipments from third countries through Vietnam will face a 40% levy, Trump said. However, he added that Vietnam could import US products with a 0% tariff. Trump's announcement comes just days before the July 9th deadline, before he ramps up tariffs on most imports. Under that plan, announced in April, US importers of Vietnamese goods would have had to pay a 46% tariff.
The US has lifted export restrictions on chip design software and ethane shipments to China. Synopsys, Cadence Design Systems, and Siemens, three of the world's largest electronic design automation software developers, say they are restoring access to their products for customers in China. The move is a further sign of the escalating trade tensions between the two countries, following recent concessions from Beijing on rare earth exports. Earlier in the day, the US also sent letters to ethane producers to lift a restrictive licensing requirement on exports to China, a rule that had been imposed in late May and June. The restrictions had been in response to China's export suspension of rare earths and related magnets in April. Last week, China's Commerce Ministry confirmed that both sides had agreed on a new framework. Under this arrangement, China will review export applications for controlled items, while the US will lift corresponding trade restrictions. We have more after this break. Don't go anywhere.
Lima lelaki penghantar makanan didakwa di Mahkamah Magistrate bagi atas tuduhan membunuh seorang pemandu kereta lelaki dalam satu kejadian.
4 sungai di sekitar kawasan perindustrian Pasir Gudang di Johor, termasuk Sungai Kim Kim, didapati tercemar dan berada pada tahap yang membimbangkan. Kerajaan sudah mulakan inisiatif untuk menggantikan kenderaan operasinya kepada kenderaan elektrik EV dalam skala kecil terlebih dahulu.
Daulat Tuanku.
Welcome back. US President Donald Trump's budget bill is heading for a final vote in the US House of Representatives. Now in the early hours of the morning, debate continues on the House floor with a final passage expected soon. Trump aims for the bill to be signed by July 4th, coinciding with Independence Day celebrations. But the plan, which he calls the Big Beautiful Bill, has faced delays in Congress due to concerns over its potential impact on healthcare and the national debt. The Senate, which is controlled by the Republican Party, had passed the bill on Tuesday.
An act to provide for reconciliation pursuant to Title II of House Concurrent.
The Pentagon says that Iran's nuclear program has been degraded by up to 2 years following US strikes that it claimed destroyed the 3 sites targeted by the US. Sean Parnell, a Pentagon spokesperson, offered the estimate at a briefing to reporters.
Our assessment of the battle damage around Fordo, Nantes, and Isfahan remains unchanged. I mean, we believe, and certainly all of the intelligence that we've seen have led us to believe that those facilities especially have been completely obliterated. And the interesting kind of side point about this, Tara, is that all of the conversations that we've had since Operation Midnight Hammer with our allies all around the world, but certainly also in the region, they say a couple of things. They share our sentiments about the degradation of Iran's nuclear program and the fact that we have degraded their program by 1 to 2 years. At least intel assessments inside the department assess that, and I think their intelligence shares that conclusion.
Current assessments by this department think it's been degraded or delayed by 1 to 2 years?
I think we're thinking probably closer to 2 years, like degraded their program by 2 years.
U.S. President Donald Trump has repeated his call for Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell to step down. It is the latest in a series of attacks that have raised concern over the independence of the U.S. central bank.
Trump called for Powell's resignation after his administration's top housing regulator urged the U.S. Congress to launch an investigation into the central banker for alleged political bias and deceptive testimony about renovations at the Federal Reserve headquarters in Washington. The president had earlier sent Powell a letter demanding that he lower the benchmark interest rate, which is currently set at a range of 4.25% to 4.5%. Trump had nominated Powell as the Fed chair during his first term. Since then, he has repeatedly criticized Powell for not backing faster rate cuts, arguing that the cautious stance was holding back economic growth. Powell was renominated to the position by President Joe Biden, with his current term set to end in May 2026.
In other news, China has warned the European Union against confrontation after Beijing was accused of undermining Europe's security. During talks in Brussels, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi told EU Chief Policy Kaja Kallas that China and the EU should not be seen as opponents despite their differences.
Both sides met for the 13th round of China-EU high-level strategic dialogue in Brussels on Wednesday. The EU is trying to stabilize ties with China amid US President Donald Trump's tariff war, but tensions with Beijing continue to rise. Kallas urged China to lift restrictions on rare earth exports and warned that Chinese support for Russia's war in Ukraine threatens European security. Wang pushed back, insisting that Beijing and Brussels should treat each other with respect, while taking a swipe at Washington, which has threatened sweeping tariffs on EU imports. The visit comes just weeks ahead of a planned summit between Chinese President Xi Jinping and top EU leaders in Beijing.
China has expressed firm support for a Southeast Asia nuclear weapon-free zone and is ready to take the lead in signing the treaty. The move follows confirmation from Foreign Minister Dato Sri Mohammed Hassan that both China and Russia have agreed to sign the Southeast Asia nuclear weapon-free zone treaty.
He added that the US is still reviewing the treaty before deciding whether to sign and that foreign ministers from relevant countries are expected to meet next week. The Southeast Asia Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone Treaty, also known as the Bangkok Treaty, was signed in 1995 by all 10 ASEAN members and came into force in 1997. Its protocol commits nuclear-armed states to respect the zone, refrain from violating the treaty, and not use or threaten to use nuclear weapons within the region. The development comes amid heightened concerns over nuclear threats following the Iran-Israel conflict involving Tehran's nuclear program.
South Korean President Lee Jae-myung says that he was doing his best to achieve a mutually beneficial and sustainable outcome from trade negotiations with the United States. He made the comments during a news conference to mark his first 30 days in office.
Lee said that tariff negotiations with the US had not been easy, and he could not say if an agreement was possible by a July 8th deadline set by Washington. During high-level trade talks last month, Washington raised issues related to South Korea's non-tariff barriers, as Seoul already imposes nearly zero tariffs on US imports under a free trade agreement, a senior South Korean trade official has said. Lee also said the South should not stop talking to the North and should improve relations based on the South Korea-US alliance. He also added that he had been surprised by the swift response by North Korea after he suspended loudspeaker propaganda broadcasts directed across the border, and said he would take additional steps to ease tensions. Under former President Yoon Suk-yeol, who had a hard line against Pyongyang, the two sides scrapped a 2018 military agreement that sharply escalated hostility. The two Koreas remain technically in a state of war under a truce that ended fighting in 1953.
The US and Indonesia will sign trade and investment deals worth $34 billion as part of ongoing trade negotiations ahead of a July 9th deadline. Indonesia's Economic Minister Airlangga Hartarto said a memorandum of understanding will be signed on July 7th, though it doesn't mean the end of talks.
Under the MOU, Hartarto said Indonesia would invest in the US, purchase American agricultural goods, and import $15.5 billion worth of energy products. He added that the deal involved the Sovereign Wealth Fund, Danantara, and private firms. Indonesia faces a 32% US tariff and had previously offered to increase imports from the US to help move talks forward. In 2024, Indonesia recorded a $17.9 billion goods trade surplus with the US. Airlangga said Indonesia hoped to secure a more favorable trade deal than Vietnam by addressing its trade imbalance with Washington. This came after the US announced a reduced 20% tariff on many Vietnamese exports, lower than the 46% rate initially proposed in April.
Thailand's opposition parties say they will hold off on a no-confidence vote against suspended Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra pending a court ruling. However, they vowed to work together to avoid political deadlock even if the court ultimately dismisses her.
Thailand's Constitutional Court had suspended Paetongtarn from duties on Tuesday following a petition from 36 senators who accused her of dishonesty and breaching ethical standards. It came after a leaked phone call between her and former Cambodian leader Hun Sen. The government, which holds a slim parliamentary majority, had reshuffled the cabinet to shore up support from its coalition partners. A total of 14 new cabinet ministers were sworn in on Thursday, including Paetongtarn, who now holds the post of Culture Minister. Thailand's Deputy Prime Minister has been appointed as acting leader in the meantime.
The World Meteorological Organization has warned that everybody is at risk amid the ongoing early summer heat wave. Spokesperson Claire Nulles says there are episodes of extreme heat which normally would be seen later on.
We are currently under the influence of a strong high-pressure system. This is trapping hot air from northern Africa over the region, and as we can see, it's having a pretty big impact on the way we feel. What is exceptional, and I would stress exceptional but not unprecedented, is the time of year. You know, we are the 1st of July and we are seeing episodes of extreme heat which normally we would see later on. Why is it happening? Various reasons. One of them is that sea surface temperatures in the Mediterranean are exceptionally high for this time of year. It's the equivalent of a land heat wave.
Nulles also said the frequency and intensity of extreme heat events are rising, with about half of the European population expected to be at high or very high risk of heat stress during the summer by 2050.
That wraps up AWANI International. Stay tuned for reports on the rivalry strategies and the shifts behind the power affairs driving the new global order. Visit international.astroawani.com for more and be sure to follow our social media accounts at Power Affairs. I'm Farhana Sheikh. Thank you for watching and good night.